Hello, my friends. Thank you for jumping on this video. My name is Rick Thomas, and I have been doing an ongoing review of the Christianity Today podcast series, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And so in this video review of their podcast series, this is their episode number 10. The title of it is The Tempest. I want to give a few thoughts about the podcast that they presented, and then I want to make some application points. Thank you again for joining me for this video review of the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. This is my 13th review, and so let me give a little bit of clarification here because this is their episode number 10. But they have also done some bonus episodes, and so I have reviewed everything that they put out in this Rise and Fall of Mars Hill series. And so even though this is episode number 10, titled The Tempest, this is my 13th review of the entire podcast series from Mike Cosper and Christianity Today. Now, this particular episode that they put out, The Tempest, they're covering the time frame of 2012 to 2014. And so that is the period that they are talking about, and it goes right up to the resignation of Mark Driscoll. They finished this podcast by saying that Mark Driscoll resigned, and then it stops. And so I'm going to assume that when they do episode 11 and episode 12, that they will start at the resignation and go all the way to the complete dissolution of the Mars Hill entity, the Mars Hill Church. Now, all of the churches did not dissolve in 2014. Some of them spun off, and they started autonomous local churches. As far as I know, those churches are still viable today, but as far as Mars Hill is concerned, it did dissolve in 2014. Now, this episode number 10, The Tempest, is 2.5 hours long. And so if you haven't listened to it yet, just to let you know, it is a marathon retelling of the final 2 years of Mars Hill Church. What Mike Cosper does is he interviews several of the participants who were there between 2012 and 2014, and all of them share their versions of the story that led to the ultimate demise of the church. This episode describes what happened like a documentary. And so if you're interested in the various storylines and the details of the individuals involved, you will learn a lot of historical facts that led to the demise of the church. It's kind of like watching a sad movie, not an American movie, because American movies end well, and we finish the movie feeling pretty good about ourselves and are thankful for what we have just watched. But this podcast series doesn't end that way because Mars Hill doesn't end well. And so if you're interested and want to learn the historical facts about what happened in the demise of a church, you can watch it, but just be warned, it is like listening to a sad movie. Now, as far as this episode is concerned, there is no new information in it as far as the rise and fall of Mars Hill. Now, let me explain what I mean. The title of the entire podcast series is The Rise and the Dramatic Fall of Mars Hill. And so there's no new facts about how that happened. Because Christianity Today has been hitting the same nail in such a redundant fashion ad infinitum. And so they could have done this entire series in one podcast or maybe two podcasts and just explain from 1996 to 2014, here's what led to the rise and here's what led to the dramatic fall, and they could have been done. But there is so much redundancy in this entire podcast series. And so there's new historical facts, but in truth, there's really no new information. You could sum up this entire podcast series in this sentence right here. Mark Driscoll is a selfishly ambitious person. Mike Cosper has said that 100 times in different ways. He has no real accountability. They have said that 100 times in different ways. He is a narcissist who is deeply insecure. He's a toxic individual, and any person who gets close to him falls apart. That's why the church ascended in popularity and growth, and that's why it had a dramatic fall. Mark Driscoll is a selfishly ambitious person with no real accountability. He is a narcissist who is deeply insecure, who is toxic, and anyone who gets close to him falls apart. And so I really do not recommend this series. I posted a video explaining why I don't recommend it or why I caution people not to watch this series. Now, I am not saying that you are to bury your head in the sand. I am not saying that this historical narrative has no value whatsoever. No, we need to know what happened. I'm just saying that it is long, it is tedious, you could say it all in one podcast or two, that it's not necessary to go through this long series and just continuing to talk about the same old things over and over again in different ways. There's so much redundancy that they spend all the time talking about what went wrong that it's hard to find any redemptive or transformative help from this podcast series. And I realize that's not their intent, to apply this to our lives practically so that we can grow from it. But that's why I have been reviewing this series and trying to make those application points, because I don't want to spend all my time in the dumpster. I want to acknowledge it. I want to talk about some of the particularities of it. But I want to do what Paul said. He gave us a full template for change. He says to put off the former manner of life in Ephesians 4:22. And by implication, that means we can't ignore the bad things about us. Our entire ministry is built on trying to understand what's wrong with us. But we want to go further than that. We want to begin a process of renewing our minds. And then we want to put on a new person that looks like Jesus. And so I've been taking these podcast reviews by talking about the dumpster fire that was Mars Hill Church. But then I want to move the conversation forward to talk about how we can renew our minds, and then also how we can put on a new person. And so I do not recommend this series, or you can listen to one or two episodes and you will have a pretty clear understanding of what went wrong with Mars Hill. And again, I put it in a succinct sentence earlier. I said Mark Driscoll is selfishly ambitious. He has no real accountability. He is a narcissist who is deeply insecure. He is toxic, and anyone who gets close to him falls apart. There you have it. Now, one of the things that I do want to highlight as far as application of this review is that this entire series from Christianity Today is what we would call in counseling, we would call it descriptive psychology. And I just want to talk about that briefly, and then I will wrap up. Descriptive psychology, simply explained, is when someone describes a problem. And that's what Christianity Today is doing primarily. They are describing a problem. They have spent 13 episodes thus far. I don't know how many hours that is. I guess it's 15 or so or more hours of just talking about the dumpster fire. And that's where I believe that it's unhealthy for our souls to spend so much time talking about what went wrong with Mars Hill. Talk about it, explain it, pick out some of the problems that are involved there. What can we learn about that? Apply that to our lives, and then try to put on a new person that looks like Jesus. But this entire podcast series is more like descriptive psychology, where the only thing that they do is describe the problem. And if you want to help an abuse victim, you have to go beyond just describing what happened to them. Now, again, there is value in that. An abuse victim wants to be understood. They want to know that you are listening to them and that you know what has happened to them. There is an unarguable need for a competent individual to listen to and understand what has happened in a victim's life. Understanding a hurt person is absolutely crucial if you're going to help them. But victims need someone to listen to their stories, and you cannot help them unless you listen well. And so that is important. It is essential. But as I've been saying, we've got to move from the narrative, which is informational, and that's what this podcast series from Christianity Today is primarily informational. but it's not transformational. And so when you are helping someone, you want to understand the dumpster fire. You want to understand what is going on in their life, but then you want to begin to move them into a transformational process so that they can experience change. Now, one of the reasons that you want to do that is because of what the word victim means. You don't want them to live in their victimness. The etymology of the word victim means vicarious. And so a vicarious person, Christ was a vicarious sufferer, or you could say that Christ was a victim. He took on our sin. He became the victim intentionally. It was the will of God for him to be the victim. It was the will of God for him to become our vicarious Savior. He is the only one that has the ability to carry the sin of another. And so one of the reasons that you want to move a victim from just the informational process of understanding what happened to them and move them to a transformational process is because you want them to be able to move from a victim to a victor. They cannot continue to wallow in what happened to them. They cannot continue to live in the reality of what someone has done to them. And many of them get stuck and they carry that sin vicariously. They carry the sin of others, and they need to learn how to cast those cares, or in this case, cast those sins on the true vicarious sufferer. My concern is that some victims of abuse, whether it's an authoritarian church leader or in other abusive context, my concern is that people would listen to this informational podcast series, which does have some merit, but they would have no ability to move forward so that they can move from informational to transformational. Now, if you are one of those people and you have been victimized by someone, then I would appeal to you to reach out and get the help that you need, get competent help. If you need some guidance in that matter, I would encourage you to come to our ministry's website, and we would love to advise and guide you. We're not a counseling organization in that we do one-to-one counseling. What we do is we do training, but people come to us all the time looking for help, and we would love to guide you and direct you to someone that could help you if you've been victimized by the abuse of a local church like Mars Hill or another type of context where someone has abused you. And so I've been reviewing the podcast series, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. This is their episode number 10. It's my episode number 13 because I've reviewed the bonus episodes as well. But the title of the episode is Tempest, The Tempest. And I just to caution you about listening to this. If you want to know what happened, you can listen to a couple of podcasts. But my appeal would be for all of us to move past the informational aspect of Mars Hill Church, and let's talk about how we can actually help victims of abuse so that they can move into a transformational process to where they can take what happened to them and put it on the true vicarious sufferer. His name is Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for watching.